That's all that's happening. Now, there are 8 cases where turning a hexagram upside down affects no change in it. In those 8 cases, a second rule has been applied, which is, if turning the hexagram upside down causes no change, then all lines change. You meet the first exception in the first 2 hexagrams. Clearly, when you invert the creative 6 solid lines, you obtain the creative again. Therefore, all lines change, and you get the receptive. So then that solved a problem of partial ordering. That showed that we were dealing not with 64 hexagrams, but with 32 pairs of hexagrams. And the next question was, what is the order of the 32 pairs? Now this is a deeper question and not so easily solved, but it was easily solved for this interior voice that had my attention. It said, look at the first order of difference. Now this is a very fancy way of saying, look at how many lines change as you move from one hexagram to the next. Obviously, as you move from the first hexagram to the second, 6 lines change. As you move from the second to the third, I forget how many it is, 4, I believe, and so on. So that you can make a linear graph of the first order of difference as you move through the King-Wen sequence. And I rushed out and bought graph paper and did this and looked at it. And it's a sawtooth. All of these figures, by the way, are in the book, The Invisible Landscape. It's a double challenge to give this lecture without visual aids, let me tell you. But as you all are probably expert visualizers, why, you should have no problem here. So when you graph the first order of difference in this way, an anomaly just jumps out at you. This is clearly not a random stochastic process that you're graphing. If it were a stochastic process, you would expect the possible values, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, to occur in more or less similar proportions. However, you notice immediately there are no values of 5. There are no first order of different changes in the King-Wen sequence of 5. Now, what is the prohibition against 5 about? I don't know, but it's worldwide and Neolithic. Astragali are the knuckle bones of sheep that have been used since the late Neolithic into Roman times to gamble with by burning dots into the knuckle bones. And in fact, playing dice is called throwing the knuckle bones. There are no Neolithic astragali with 5 dots burned into them. It's a number which is just strictly avoided. So there is some curious thing going on with the number 5. You know, in the Timaeus, as people are coming in and sitting down for dinner, Plato turns to Timaeus and he says, the 1 generates the 2, and the 2 the 3, but where, oh, where is the 4th, my dear Timaeus? And this, the first 4 numbers, seem to lie in a much more archetypically intense relation than the number 5. 5 has been called the first human number. In any case, that was not the anomaly which leaped out at my eye when I graphed this thing. What I noticed was that there was a sawtooth stroke at the beginning and at the end, such that if a reflection, or to use the technical term, if a stereoisometric reflection were rotated 180 degrees, the 2 ends would fit together perfectly. They would dovetail like the joints of a cabinet maker. And it would not fall into this kind of parallelism or congruence at any other point, only at the beginning and the end, and only, I then noticed, if the hexagrams were paired across from each other in such a way that they always added to 64. In other words, 64 is across from 64. That's the exception. 63 is across from 1, 62 is across from 2, 63 is across, and so forth. Okay, so that it sums in all directions to 64. And so I looked at that for a long, long time. And then I saw that what I had done, that though there were these congruencies at the beginning and the end, there were also approaches to parallelism at 6 points in this figure, rather evenly spaced. And I realized then that what I had done is I had taken the entire King Wen sequence, run it forward, run it backward against itself, and created a kind of macro hexagram, a super hexagram, which contained the entire sequence twice, running backward and forward. And at that point, I had insight into a curious passage in the Confucian commentaries where it says of the I Ching, the backward-running numbers refer to the future, the forward-running numbers refer to the past. This was an anagram which makes no sense whatsoever unless you posit the kind of structure that I'm talking about. So then I wondered, what could this thing possibly be for? And I experimented with, I said, okay, this thing I have built in accordance with the principle of hierarchy construction, which is completely expressed at every point in Chinese history and must therefore be assumed to antedate Chinese history and be prehistoric. This hierarchical principle can be used to manipulate this strange figure. Now, the lines of a hexagram are called yao, and there are 384 yao in the 64 hexagrams. Obviously, 6 times 64 is 384. So I said, I will take my figure and I will treat it as the yao of a hexagram. And so I made 6 of them, end to end. And then I said, okay, now I have the 6 lines of a hexagram, some kind of hyper or macro hexagram. But a hexagram is composed of more than 6 lines. It is composed of 2 trigrams. So I took my figure and I multiplied it by a value of 3, and I laid those 2 over the 6, generating everything from a common point of origin. So then I said, okay, now I have everything that is in a hexagram except the hexagrammatic wholeness that is embodied by the thing as a gestalt, as a whole-nomic entity. So I laid a big one over the 6 little ones and the 2 medium-sized ones, generating everything from a common origin point and having everything return to a common origin point. So it looks, and it's figured in the invisible landscape, like an oscilloscope tracing, a 3-leveled tracing of lines, a tremendous mishmash. And this was the problem. The voice then was by this time saying, this is the map, the fractal map of all space and all time. It exists on many levels of resonance. And I personally could feel that. And I spent literally months, and it was madness. Much of this was generated in the Amazon jungle. You have to picture a man in a thatch house on stilts, with the Amazon flowing by, the Indians, the drugs, everything raging outside, and me with my slowly deteriorating pad of graph paper, just drawing these lines hours and hours a day, and looking at them, and finally realizing, convincing myself that it did in fact map time in a certain way, but realizing that it had the quality of a mystical doctrine. The interpretation of these slashing, paralleling, intersecting lines was impossible to convey to another person. I had to have a method of reducing this compound, complex wave to a single wave, moving in a single direction on a single level. Fortunately for you, I'm going to skip over the mathematical details of how this was accomplished.